The story begins with some guy telling a girl that if she goes to jail instead of his girlfriend, then he will marry her. At which point the young girl lies on the floor and thinks about what kind of nonsense is going on around her right now. But the man continues to press her and asks her not to pretend to be dead, and to answer him immediately. At this point, she opens her eyes and thinks a little about the fact that this voice is very familiar to her. Then she looks up and sees a handsome young man in front of her who looks pretty decent. He calls the main character by the name Mu Wei and asks her if the girl is deaf or if she is suddenly not mine. He notes that he asks her this because he can't understand why she doesn't answer his question. At this point, he starts to look even more closely at the girl who is kneeling in front of him. He asks her if she heard that he asked her to pretend to be Yue and spend a couple of days in jail. Apparently, the guy says it seriously. We can see it in his facial expression. He still does not understand why the girl does not answer and asks her why she is silent. Looking directly at the guy, the girl's face changes. She watches in horror and hears his words, then wonders if this horrible man is really her ex-husband. Suddenly, another female voice is heard. Some girl turns to this guy and tells him that he doesn't need to do this. At the same time, we learn that his name is Chi. Also, the girl asks him not to sacrifice his happiness for her. At this point, this girl with pink hair looks quite sincere. She touches Chie's hand and says with a very sad look that it would be better if she went to jail, noting that she didn't mean to hurt anyone. Then the girl with tears in her eyes comes even closer to her brother and puts her hand on his chest. Then the girl says that she did not expect her sister to call her at that very moment and scold her for being too close to her brother. The girl also says that she wanted to explain everything. But then happened that crucial event, seeing how hard it is for his sister to talk about it. Chi asks that Yue not to worry, because he knows that she is innocent. Yes, and in addition she has a weak heart. Chi promises her that he will solve everything, and the girl, according to him, is not even worth worrying. At this point, she leans into the Chai, calls him brother, after which the girl with a smirk looking at the main character states that the guy is very kind to her. At this point, the protagonist's face changes and we can see that she seems surprised by something and perhaps even frightened. She wonders if Lin Yue is really here too. Then we are taken back in time and see Ling Yue talking to the main character on the phone. Then Ling Yue called her sister. Also, then she said that she was marrying Chi's brother. After these words, the girl began to mock the protagonist. Did not ask whether our protagonist is unhappy, because recently she had a miscarriage, died parents through her fault, and now her lover has become a stranger to her person. At this point, the protagonist is puzzled by what is happening, but then the sister says that she is sincerely grateful to her, because at the expense of her naivete, she had a good time. The sister also thanks the main character for the fact that if it wasn't for her help, she wouldn't have been adopted, and she wouldn't have been so happy. But she mentions that it was her fault that she was left without a kidney, and her mother died trying to save her. But now she believes that her sister will forgive her after all, and all because of the fact that now she is the only relative of the main character. Because of these words that the main character heard from her sister, she fainted in the subway. Immediately after this action is transferred back to the present time, then the protagonist with horror realizes that she will be unconscious in the subway. But she cannot understand why she suddenly found herself here. Looking around, she realizes that this house belongs to Lu Chi. Realizing this, the girl looks around with interest to see what is going on. The moment she started to look around and was suddenly grabbed by her ex-husband's face, turning to Mu Wei. He asked why she suddenly made such a stupid face. He asks her, is she really so happy that he, Great Lu Chi, is marrying her? At that moment, he looks directly at his ex-wife and asks her why she has decided to do this to her sister. Naturally, when she hears these words, Mu Wei is very surprised. She does not even know what to say. Clutching his wife's face even tighter, Lu Chi says that if she hadn't taken her out with her call and brought her to a heart attack, her sister probably wouldn't have run over anyone either. At this point, anger is visible on his face, but through his teeth, the guy asks why the girl is so angry. Also, right after that, he asks his ex-wife to behave normally, because according to him, only in this case he will fulfill the agreement between them. It turns out he has already created a plan to save his beloved from prison. He tells the protagonist that she must tomorrow go to the police station and confess that it was she who hit that man. but suddenly the protagonist removes from his face. It naturally surprises him very much. But the main character, who knows that she is not guilty of anything, looks at her ex-husband with her penetrating gaze and asks him not to dare to touch her anymore. Naturally, the guy is very surprised by this behavior of the girl. He does not understand why she suddenly decided to do so. But the main character does not even seem to care, and she just gets up from his knees on his feet. At this point, she thinks about the fact that she cannot understand what is happening at all. However, there is something that she thinks the girl can never forget, because she believes that this action was the beginning of the end and the saddest moment that ever happened in her life. At this point, the girl really looks very sad and upset about it all. It turns out that Lu Qi was her lover, and Ling Yue was the daughter of a family friend who was taken in by her parents. It turns out that when she was a child, the protagonist fell in love with this guy and did not care about him. Then she saved him. Because of this, their parents, who knew each other before, and arranged a mini wedding for them. Then suddenly her lover fell in love with her adopted sister, Lin Yue. It turned out that this love was mutual, and the protagonist was just a hindrance in their relationship. Then the girl loved her husband very much, so much so that she was devoted to him in everything. She even let him do whatever he wanted, and it was because of this that she even agreed to go to jail instead of her sister. But it did not end there, because in prison, because of the constant abuse of her, and the girl burst one of the kidneys. But it was not the end, because after prison, the guy still fulfilled his promise and married her. Thanks to this, she thought that finally will be happy. But after the wedding, the guy became indifferent to her. Even during her pregnancy, he had a strange relationship with her sister. It was because of this that she realized her mistake and left the country with her child, who was still in her womb. Soon after that, the irreversible happened. Her father passed away. Because of this, the girl was physically and mentally exhausted. She could not bear this grief. So she had a miscarriage. Because of this, she could not get pregnant anymore. And until her death, she did not realize that it was all her sister's fault. Right after that, we are transported back to the present. Then the guy asks the girl what she means when she says she won't do it. Not confused. The girl tells him that her words mean only that she won't go anywhere, because her sister's accident doesn't affect her in any way. We learn that she only said that because she thinks it all started when she agreed to sit in her sister's place. She realizes that even if she's hallucinating before she dies, she won't make the same mistake again. Right after that, with a smirk on her face, the protagonist says that her sister said she would go to jail. So she tells her beloved ex-husband that if she said so, then let her confess, because maybe she'll get a couple of days off for it. Naturally, because of this, the guy was at first puzzled. But then he turned in rage. He shouted at his alleged girlfriend and asked what kind of nonsense she is talking, because her sister has health problems, and because of this, he cannot understand how she can be sent to such a place. But these words even more annoyed the protagonist. She wondered whether, because her sister has health problems, can be sent there, healthy her. Then, the girl just turned her head and said that in general, the problems of her sister, and she does not care. Also, at this point, she asked herself how blind she had been up to this point that she had married such a ruthless man. The girl turns away from the guy and her sister and says that she has no desire to take on someone else's guilt. At the moment when she left the main thing that she does not want to waste any more time on them, she realizes that if she comes home, she will probably see her parents. At this moment, Yue pushes the guy to stop her sister. The guy naturally gives in to this manipulation and asks the girl if she has a conscience because Yue is her sister. These words very much affected the girl, and turning to her ex-husband, she asks, "Is he really going to talk to her about conscience? Because what the hell can be conscience if her sister wants her to go to jail instead of her?" She also points her finger at her half-sister and says that first of all, they are not even sisters, because they are not related by blood. Naturally, Yue, who has been skillfully manipulating her sister so far, is surprised by this turn of events. But the protagonist does not slow down and says that the girl's surname is Lin and her surname is Mu. According to her, Lin is only the adopted daughter of her family, and secondly, about conscience. Everything depends on the person. She asks whether to tell them a parable about the conscience of the peasant before the snake. In case anyone doesn't know, it's a parable about how a farmer saw a poisonous snake freezing, and if he warmed it up, it would bite him, and if he passed by, he would leave it to die. Hearing about it, and her sister naturally tries to pressure her somehow and starts crying. She says she doesn't understand how her sister can say such a thing when they have lived together for more than 10 years, and she always considered her family, according to Lin. She could never expect such a thing from her. Naturally, the guy starts to calm down his girlfriend. He asks her not to take everything too personally, but her sister is crying, not because of that, but because she doesn't understand why suddenly Mu Shi-wei refused. And why the hell did her voice break out? Lin is so much agitated by this event that even began to bite her nails from nerves. She realizes that before her sister used to fulfill all their requests. But now, something has clearly gone wrong, and she is completely unclear what exactly it is. At this point, the protagonist continues to press her sister and her lover. She says that she doesn't need such an unscrupulous sister, but without even finishing her sentence, the guy asks her to shut up, while Lin looks at her with fury. The guy asks what she wants, because he has already promised to marry her, and he asks that the protagonist does not cross the line. Of course, her sister is still trying to manipulate Chi, and tells him not to do it, but it's just manipulation on her part. Then the protagonist, as if without emotion, says that if they have to marry only to save her sister from prison, she is ready for something more. Because of this, she tells her ex-husband to break the engagement. At this point, the girl looks quite serious and determined. Dear friends, and if you want to see the continuation of this manga, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. And when this video will accumulate 40,000 views or 5,000 likes, and will definitely do for you the next part, of course, as the chapters of this story will be released. Coming back to our story, we can see a very surprised face of the guy who doesn't even know what to say to the words about breaking the engagement. He asks the protagonist what she is saying. Then the girl raises her hand and looks directly at her ex-husband and asks him if that's why they're acting like monsters. She emphasizes that she doesn't want to stand in the way of their true love, and that's why she decided to break off the engagement. Hearing these words, her sister Lin was very surprised. At this moment, it was as if the sky had opened up on her, and she looked at her sister with shock. She had not expected anything like this. But the protagonist is relentless in her decision, and continues to talk about the situation. She says that now Chi can marry Lin Yue, because he now nothing will interfere. At this point, her hand began to clench into a fist, turned to his alleged wife. He asks her what kind of nonsense she says. At this point, he even grabs her hand out of anger. Right after that, the guy tries to say something to her about it. As suddenly, something happens. Namely, some man enters his room. At that time, Chi was holding his hand, who tried to stop him. At that moment, the man who entered the room tells his master that the lady called and said that his uncle is coming soon. According to this man, the guy needs to go to the main house. At that moment, still angrily holding his wife's hand, Chi tells the guy that he will go to that house right away, and the guy realizes that because of the incident that happened with Ling Yue, he has completely forgotten about his coming to China. At this point, Chi also says that Mu Shi-wei should stay here, because he will soon come back and deal with her, of course. It is not even expected that the protagonist will agree to the conditions set for her. She immediately takes her phone out of her pocket and dials the number of the police. She says that he is illegal detention, punishable by imprisonment up to 3 years. At this point, looking at her husband, she asks if he is sure that he wants to stop her here. Of course, seeing this, the guy is very surprised because he did not expect anything like this from a girl who has always been silent until now. Naturally, because of this, between the guy and the girl appeared some tension. Seeing this, her sister is trying to smooth things over and asks Chi to forget about all this. She says that her sister can leave because the guy needs to first solve the issue of work. At this point, the guy just waved away his mistress and asked her to be quiet and also to be calm because he said he would help her in any way possible to avoid prison and keep his health. These words naturally a little surprised Lin Yue. The girl is very much surprised because she did not expect that the creature who is her sister herself will break up. Also, she is very much nervous that she was well aware that she and himself did not want to break the engagement between him and her sister. At this point, through gritted teeth, the girl is thinking that she will still be able to carry out her plan. She even seems to communicate with her sister and asks her if she really thinks she can't carry out her plan without her consent. Of course, the girl immediately tries to put her devious plan into reality and turning to her sister tells her not to be angry. She also tells the protagonist that she can take her wherever she needs to go, but the girl refuses to help and says that she does not need anything because she can get there herself. Hearing the refusal from her sister, Lin Yue began to giggle and smile, and she thought about the fact that she still offered her sister help, but she wanted to go alone, which of course will be very bad events for her. Then a black car, which looks quite expensive, is heading somewhere in rainy weather. The driver is in the car and tells Mr. Liu that there is a thunderstorm today, and because of it they won't be able to go any faster. He says they will probably arrive late at Liu's house. The passenger who is in the same car reads some documents and says that he doesn't care about it. Naturally, the driver is a little surprised to hear such a thing and looks at his passenger as if even something very much surprised. It turns out that he was very surprised to hear that this man is an uncle, but he still notices that the guy looks younger than he thought. The driver even wonders if this man is really the heir to the Liu family at such a young age. Suddenly there was thunder and lightning, and the main character, who was dressed too lightly for such weather, appeared in front of the car on which the uncle was driving with his driver. Naturally, the driver was very much frightened that he saw suddenly in front of him some girl on an empty highway. He immediately began to press the brakes to prevent a collision with the girl. The unforeseen situation is noticed, and uncle, who is in the car. After a short time, the car naturally stops, but the main character who went out on the highway is already lying on this very highway, unconscious. The passenger naturally asks his driver, "What happened?" And then the frightened driver turns to his master and tells him that apparently they hit a man who stepped out into the road. Hearing this, the guy immediately ordered his driver to park the car so he could get out and see who they hit. After taking an umbrella and going outside, the guy approaches the girl they hit. Towering over her, he extends his hand to her and asks her if she's okay, while the protagonist is crying and kneeling in the middle of the road. She even moaned in pain, but suddenly her face turned a little red. Uncle, also a little, with surprise, watched her. As suddenly the girl got out of the way and reached for Mr. Liu. She immediately took the guy by the head and began to kiss him passionately in the pouring rain. Naturally, he could not expect such a thing, but Mr. Liu himself did not oppose such a gesture from the girl in any way. Further not long, they continued kissing right in the pouring rain. It looked as if both characters were highly aroused. Suddenly, the girl bites her uncle's lip, and then the man got very angry and pushed the girl away from him. Naturally, he could not expect even a kiss, but the bite was already quite unnecessary. From his pushing, the girl even begins to fall back on the track. Because the man pushed her away with great force, the protagonist collapsed senselessly right onto the wet highway, at which point the guy was just watching. The driver, who was still in the car all this time, tries to see something through the storm that is outside. He thinks about what is going on there, because he sees absolutely nothing. Mr. Liu at this time just looked at the girl and thought about what he had done. He even covered his mouth with his hand as if he was a little regretful for pushing her away from him so hard that she collapsed. Suddenly, the girl stands up wet asphalt, which of course a little surprised the guy who had previously looked at the senseless body of the girl. She once again gives him a surprise. Immediately, she pounced on him. She continued to hug him and asked him not to leave but to stay with her together. She even blushed a little, because apparently the girl was a little embarrassed. Naturally, Liu was very much surprised by such behavior from a girl he didn't know. Looking directly at her, he asked her what she was doing. Naturally, he didn't understand her reactions, especially to a person she didn't know. At this point, the girl answers nothing to his question, and just raising her gaze straight at Mr. Liu, crying and a little embarrassed, she asks for the guy to just hug her. Immediately after these words, she herself climbs up to Mr. Liu to hug, at which point the guy thinks about the fact that apparently something is obviously wrong with her, but he does not hug the girl, but just thinks about it. At this time, she begins to put his hand under his jacket and asks once again that he hugged her. Of course, because of this reaction, the guy is very much embarrassed and once again surprised. After a short time, the driver gets very scared when he hears the door to his car open. Right after that, Mr. Liu throws the bound girl into the car. Immediately after that, he covered her with his coat and told his driver to start the car. According to him, they are going to the hospital. At this point, Mr. Liu still looks as if he is thinking about everything that is happening. Naturally, the driver is shocked at the good-naturedness of his master. He immediately wonders what will happen with their trip to his nephew's house. But the master tells his driver that he will warn everyone that he will be a little late. After a short time, he actually calls his nephew. The guy who has already arrived instead of his destination looks a little glum about having to wait for his uncle, but immediately informs him that he had an incident on the way to the house. According to him, he needs to take someone to the hospital urgently. While the girl is shaking and her face is a little flushed, she also says she is a little hot. Seeing her reaction and hearing her words, Mr. Liu just touches her face with his hand to see if she is sick. Right after that, he tells his nephew that it is because of all the above reasons that he will be late for their meeting. When he heard a woman's voice, the guy got very angry. He started yelling at his uncle and asked if it was true that he was in the car with some woman. At the same time, the Chi thought that the voice of the girl he heard next to his uncle seemed to be very familiar to him. But the uncle does not react to the aggression of his nephew and just asks that he told his sister-in-law that he will come to apologize in a couple of days. Of course, hearing about it, the guy became even more furious and began to shout into the phone. But the Liu has already hung up. Immediately after that, the girl put her head on Mr. Liu's thigh. Naturally, the master was very much surprised by this and asked her what she was even doing now. As usual, the protagonist does not answer anything to the guy and just tells him once again that she is getting very hot. Hearing this, Liu just looked at her meaningfully and as if thinking about something. After a short thought, Uncle Chi asked his companion to sit normally, because if she continues to behave like this, he will simply throw her out of the car. Hearing this, girl still continues to insist on his own and says that she is hot and she will not obey him. She just stands next to Mr. Liu's shoulder and looking directly at him, the girl asks him to hug her because she is hot. Of course, Uncle Chi does not lose his head and continues to keep apart without giving any sign that it bothers him. Seeing all the emotionlessness to the guy, the protagonist suddenly clung to his neck and began to kiss it. As usual, did not expect such a drastic change in the behavior of his fellow traveler. But still, her behavior did not suit the young man, and he asked her to let him go. At this time, the girl, just with a little shyness, continued, and at the same time moaned. Seeing this, the driver was very much afraid and embarrassed. He even squeezed into the seat and thought that he would prefer to just forget about it and pretend that he did not see or hear anything. Suddenly, Mr. Liu asked his driver to stop the car. After the driver obeyed his order, the guy opened the door and got out of his car. Suddenly, the driver noticed that his boss had snatched the girl he had recently thrown into their car. At this point, the driver asked himself if his boss was just going to dump this girl on the road. But everything turned out to be not so simple, and Mr. Liu opened the trunk and then threw a girl in it so that she did not bother him in the cabin of his car. After he did it, when the moment came to close the trunk, Guy with interest looked at the main character, not understanding what is happening. Immediately after that, the surprised driver noticed that his master was returning to the car all alone. He understood what his master had done, but did not say anything. Immediately after that, Liu got into his car and ordered the driver to drive. The guy was all wet because he was in the pouring rain. Dear friends, and if you want to see the continuation of this story, then be sure to subscribe to the channel and do not forget to click on the bell to not miss the corresponding video. And if you want to speed up the release of the next part, then be sure to click the like under the video. Because if under this video will accumulate 40,000 views or 5,000 likes, and I will definitely start to do for you the next part. Of course, if there will be chapters. Returning to our story, we can notice that the girl is already in the hospital room. She woke up and with horror tried to understand where she is. Of course, she immediately guessed that she is in the hospital. Standing up on the bed, she began to wonder how she ended up here and what happened that she ended up in the hospital. Suddenly, the girl heard someone's male voice from outside. This man was Mr. Liu. He asked the protagonist if she finally woke up. Naturally, because the girl did not remember anything. She just looked at the guy in bewilderment. After gaining some courage to look directly at Mr. Liu, she dares to ask him who he is. Hearing this question, the guy asks the girl if she really doesn't remember what happened at night when he found her in the middle of the road. At this time, we can notice on his neck bites and hickeys. Hearing the words that something had happened during the night, the girl seemed to start slowly remembering what she was doing. She of course immediately noticed that there were bites and hickeys visible on his neck. Seeing this, she blushed a little because of the shame. She began to wonder with what kind of force it must have taken to leave such visible mutilation. While she remembered how she had begged the guy to hug her, that memory made her blush a little. But worse for her in this situation, she remembered all the other things she had done that night. She even remembered how she had jumped on the guy and started kissing him passionately. Out of all these memories, the girl grabbed her head. Obviously, she was getting very embarrassed about everything she had done. She even started to question you if she had really attacked a stranger and left so many marks on him. Seeing the girl's confused reaction and the way she clutched her head, the Lord said that he noticed that she seemed to remember everything. Now he asked her to answer a couple of questions he was about to ask. Naturally, the girl could not refuse the guy in this and asked him what he wants to know from her. Then without delay, the gentleman went straight to the point and asked the girl who she was, and why last night she decided to throw herself under his car. Hearing this, the girl was certainly a little perplexed. She was surprised because she didn't remember the whole night completely, but only the most desperate actions she did. Looking straight at the guy, she asked him if she really threw herself in front of a car, and also asked him why she did it. Naturally, Mr. Liu, who also didn't understand why she did it, told the girl that he too would be interested to know. He also asked why she didn't worry about her safety on such a dangerous night, and how she risked stopping someone's car in the first place. Especially the guy is surprised that she was not even afraid that the driver did not have time to slow down and hit her. Hearing these words, the main character thought a little, and tried to remember in detail last night. Finally, Mu Se-wei's memories from last night were starting to come through. Turns out she was beside the road and waiting for her cab to come to her. After the glad-to-know girl got into the car, for she thought she had escaped her sad fate, she still looked quite cheerful, unlike the cab driver who was smiling dryly, as if he was going to do something bad. Already after the cab with the girl went out of town, the very heavy rain began. There, the cab driver began to give the girl some drug, naturally against her will. Immediately after that, some other guys who were not in that cab approached her. One of them held the girl so that she could not do anything. At that moment, the protagonist was really helpless. She looked down at her feet and realized that she could do something to help herself. So she suddenly stabbed one of the guys who had attacked her in the groin area, at which point the guy's fly was already unzipped. Of course, it was clear what they were going to do. She managed to escape from the clutches of these vicious kidnappers, and she began to run away, while naturally being terrified by the situation that is happening. But because the protagonist was wearing heels, she could not run away too far, and one of the guys still managed to catch up with her. In order to stop the protagonist, he decided to push her by the head. It was because of this that the girl lost her balance and fell. Right after that, her memories seemed to cut off. Being already in her hospital bed, the protagonist trembled with fear, and from the thoughts of what happened, she immediately said that she urgently needed to go to the police. When the gentleman heard about it, of course, he looked a little surprised. You could tell from his face that it was as if he didn't understand anything and just wondered for a while what could have happened. He immediately made the assumption that the girl wanted to say that someone had made her like that too. At which point he smiled as if he didn't believe it, or as if it had all been set up by him, which of course it wasn't. He assumed that the main character was just robbed, after which she was drugged with some drugs, but she still managed to escape. And then she ran into him in the middle of the road. Hearing this, and realizing how much the guy's version is true, the girl was even a little surprised. At this point, the girl says that everything is really as Mr. Liu says. According to her, it was like that. At this point, she thinks about the fact that this is probably not a hallucination, because she is really alive. She is only interested in how it could happen. At this point, the girl, as if an epiphany descends on her. She wonders if she really has traveled back in time. This fact seems to scare her a little bit. At that moment, a knock was heard on the door of their hospital room. Mr. Liu allowed the guy who knocked on it. Naturally, a young white-haired guy entered the room at once and was glad that the girl was finally awake. A guy comes in and tells Mr. Liu that he has to go now because they are waiting for him in the conference room. Upon hearing this, Mr. Liu says that they will go anyway. But before he looks at the girl, he says that all the women who have done it have the same excuse. He says it's not the first time he's seen and heard a story about a woman drugged out of nowhere and thrown herself into his arms. He said that she was not the first to do this and was trying to get his attention, but he also noticed that the girl played better than all those who were her predecessors. Hearing this, the protagonist seemed to be very angry, and her face showed the surprise and misunderstanding she was feeling towards Mr. Liu and this whole situation. Naturally, she immediately asked the gentleman what he meant when he said those words. She asked the guy if he really thought she wanted to seduce him on purpose. Hearing this question, Mr. Liu asks if it was not so, and then the girl gets even more angry. Hearing these words, she even begins to lose her temper, and then giving vent to her emotions. She yelled at the guy. While yelling, she said the gentleman was overreacting. She said he was a goddamn pucksin. Hearing that word, the guy wondered what the word pucksin meant. Apparently, he didn't even know what she was talking about. Also being very angry, she asked who he thought he was. After all, he is not a UN to think she wants him. Naturally, seeing such a reaction from the girl, both guys look straight at her in bewilderment. Another guy, seeing his friend's astonished reaction, asks, Mr. Truthfully, he doesn't know the meaning of the word pucksin. He tells his friend that the girl has now literally called him an ordinary, in every way, but overconfident young man. Then, Mr. Liu's friend starts laughing and states that this is the first time he has ever heard someone describe his friend as a regular guy. He even starts laughing a little at this, because apparently this situation amuses him a lot. Feeling a little humiliated, the guy throws the package his friend brought right on the girl's bed. Then he says he doesn't care at all who is behind her. He just tells her to tell that person not to even think about his place, and he also notes that if he catches her again next time, he won't let her go. As they were about to leave, suddenly, the gentleman's friend turned to the girl and said goodbye to her while calling her a beauty. Also, the guy said that he hoped that they would see each other again someday. Immediately after these words, the guys loudly slammed the door and left the room of the girl. At this time, she still continued to be very angry, because in her opinion, this is simply incomprehensible, and this guy is really sick. She notices that although he's not handsome, but his self-righteousness and narcissism are disgusting, she thinks that this guy needs to be treated to get better, and she looks at the bag they put on her bed. Still do not know what is in the package. The girl thinks that maybe the guy left her a warning, but at the same time she says that she is not guilty of anything and does not understand why he left it to her. But suddenly, after she opened the package, the girl is naturally very surprised. As it turned out, there is not a warning but new clothes that this young man gave her. She began to look at these clothes with surprise and admiration. At that moment, she remembered that her clothes had gotten very dirty yesterday, and she also thought that she could not have imagined that this narcissist would be so attentive to her. A short time later, the girl was already at the reception desk of the very hospital where she had spent the night. Apparently, she was about to be discharged and had come to have her treatment fees calculated. Then the girl who was at the reception desk handed her a document and said that the total cost of hospitalization is 11.322 yuan. She also said that the girl should go to the cashier and pay the bill. For those who do not understand, this is about $1,600 per night. Naturally, having heard such a price, the protagonist was very much surprised. She did not understand how it could be, because she only spent a night in this hospital, and why she should pay so much. Then the girl behind the cash register, obviously not too happy about this reaction from the girl, asked her if she really didn't know she was lying in the ward. Hearing about it, the protagonist asked why she was put in the VIP room, because she did not give her consent. At that time, men who also wanted to come to the registrar hurried the girl and got very angry because she stretched the conversation. At this moment, the girl at the reception desk says that it was the decision of the one who brought her, and with all questions the main phenomenon can address only to him, because according to her there are more people behind the girl. Also at this moment the girl will think that pucksin is the lousiest qualities of all that can meet a man. She also says that such a quality as puksin is harmful to physical, mental health and misleading, and she sees that on that document, which is a check, was written the name of the person who brought it. It is then that the girl learns that the guy's name is Lu Tingyuan. At this, it does not bring the girl to any thoughts except thoughts of contempt for this man. She asks herself what makes him think she can afford hospitalization costing more than 10 grand. At the same time, the girl realizes that the situation is a bit more deplorable than she could think before, because only now she noticed that her cell phone was stolen along with her bag. Seeing the surprised face of the protagonist, the girl who is at the reception desk asks what's wrong. Then after a short thought, the protagonist pretends that everything is normal and decides to answer her. She said she just lost her cell phone and that's why she can't pay for the treatment at the clinic. And the girl wonders if the hospital worker can lend her the phone so that she can find someone to pick her up and pay for everything. At this moment, the girl is sitting in the waiting room of the hospital and thinks about the fact that she is still not mentally ready yet. But now the people she is going to call are the only ones she can really rely on. At that moment, one of the guards who work here comes up to her and asks who needed a phone. Of course, the girl stands up and identifies herself as the person who needs a phone. Then the girl takes the phone that was brought to her and calls someone's number. It turns out that the person she called is her own mother. Naturally, the woman is very happy to talk to her daughter. Then she says the girl's name and the nearby Lin hears it. She is naturally very surprised to hear a mother talking to her daughter, and then being with a cup of tea in her hand, the girl thinks about whether these jerks really yesterday missed Mu Shi Wei. Finally becomes apparent the fact that the kidnapping of the girl was organized by her sister. At this time, the worried mother is chatting with her daughter, and Lin is giving tea to her father, while the girl is thinking about the fact that she knew that Wei would contact the family. Naturally, the girl's mom is concerned about where she is now, and asks why she changed her number. The woman also asks how she is doing and notes that she and the girl's father miss her. Hearing this, the girl's father is very angry. He says that he does not exclude his daughter, while calling her a disrespectful girl. He also notes that once she goes out, she should not return to their house. Hearing the harsh words of her husband, the mother of the girl asks her not to listen, because in fact he misses her very much. She also asked her daughter where the girl is now. So there the mother hears the answer that she is in hospital number 1, and she lost her phone and has no money to pay for hospitalization. When the woman heard about it, she was furious. She asked how it could be and why her daughter is in the hospital. Naturally, the woman is very worried and asks what happened to Wei, trying to get out of it. The girl says that a lot of things happened, but at the same time she changes the topic of conversation and asks her mother if she will borrow some money to pay the bills. Hearing this, the woman asks her daughter not to worry and wait a little, because she will now come to her. Naturally, the girl is a little surprised by this. At this time, her mother is already going to go to her. Of course, the father is not very happy about it, and asks his wife about what she was so much hanging out with his daughter. Hi, at the same time, he notes that the girl herself left and now cannot even pay for her medicine, but the woman doesn't pay attention to his words and just waved him off to help their daughter. At which time the man realized that he couldn't stop the woman and asked her what about her purse. Immediately after that, a guard comes to the girl who brought the phone. She naturally thanked him nicely for his help and handed him back the phone, while she thought about the fact that in her past life, because of her sister, she and her parents had a very bad fight. The girl remembers that in a fit of anger, then she left home, and very offended, after which she no longer communicated with her parents, although she realizes that in fact her parents always loved her, and her mother tolerated any of her mistakes. At the same time, she also remembers beautiful moments about her father. She remembers that her father, although he was not able to express his feelings and emotions, was always there for her. At this point, the protagonist regrets that she realized all these things too late. Because in the past life they died before they reconciled, the girl naturally realizes that this time she must protect them. While the girl sits in the waiting room and waits for her mother to arrive, the guard calls someone and tells the gentleman that he did as he asked. It turns out that he lent the phone to the girl to call him at the request of this man. Then the gentleman tells the guy to send him the number and continue to follow her. After a short time, her mother came to the hospital with her sister. Naturally, the girl is very happy to see her mother, but at the same time, you can see from her face that she is in mixed feelings. The mother immediately went to the girl and asked her if she was okay. Of course, Lin also pretends to be worried about her sister and is not involved in what is happening. She says she is glad that the girl finally decided to contact her parents, because according to her, they were all very worried. Hearing these words, Wei, of course, doesn't believe it, and starts to mock her sister a little. She insinuates that Lin didn't care about her at all, and also asks if it's true that her sister is now acting like a kind girl. Then Lin continued to play the role of a good girl, and complained about it to her mom. Then my girls asked Wei why she immediately started bullying Yue. Then the protagonist naturally tried to justify herself and said that she wasn't bullying anyone, and her mother just didn't know what her sister had done. Then the protagonist tried to talk about what had happened, but Lin interrupted her on purpose and said that she made her angry. She said that yesterday Wei refused her offer to go together, but at the same time, trying to absolve herself of guilt, Lin said that if she had insisted on it, her sister would not have been in the hospital. Trying to make it up to her mother, she lowered her head and said with a sad look that it was all her fault, so she was trying not to lose face in front of her mother. After that, she immediately grabbed the money from her mother to pay for the hospitalization and told her that she would give her mother and sister time to rest while she went and paid for everything she needed. Naturally, the main character was a little surprised by such behavior on the part of the girl, as well as the girl's mother, who even tried to stop her adopted daughter. When leaving, the protagonist's sister pretends to cry, which is obviously another one of her tricks designed to morally pressure pity. After seeing this, the mother really felt sorry for her other daughter, and after thinking about the situation for a while, she said that Yue was really worried about her. The mother also emphasizes that when Lin heard that her sister was in the hospital, she immediately volunteered to drive her to the hospital. But she also mentions that if Lin did something wrong, then Wei Hao's sister should forgive her. Of course, if she can. Saying this, the girl's mother holds her hand. Hearing these words, the protagonist, as if even a little thought about them, in order to calm her mother, the girl said that she understood everything, and offered her mother to sit down a little to rest. At this point, the protagonist thinks about the fact that thanks to her sister's efforts, her parents never realized anything about her true nature and intentions that she has. Only at the same time, the girl is very much afraid that her parents simply will not believe her words, especially after such a long separation. And she recalls a moment in her past life when her mother lay on the bed in front of her and asked her not to worry, because according to her, the main thing is that she was fine. It turns out the protagonist is also aware that after she went to jail, her kindly sister bribed her cellmate and ordered her to beat her until she was seriously injured. And it was because of these injuries that she had suffered, and because of the severe damage to her kidneys failed. Because of all this, she needed an urgent transplant. And when the protagonist found out that the donor was her own mother, she was already severely ill and soon died. Naturally, the protagonist realizes that all this was the work of Lin Yue, while her evil sister calls Wei a lucky bitch who stumbled upon someone in a deserted place and a man who dared to help her. Looking at the check for payment, Lazy thinks about who the jerk who ruined her plans is. Looking right at the hospital discharge, she sees that it says the name of the young man who saved Wei. The girl guesses that it was he who saved her sister and put her in the ward, while looking ominously at the check. The girl thinks about the fact that for some reason this name sounds very familiar to her. She even specially memorized it to check later. At the same time, the guard takes a photo of the girl who is talking to her mother. Seeing that the girl is about to leave, the guard goes right behind her to follow her. It turns out that the girl went to the stairwell, and after her came the guard, who was surprised to notice that he no longer sees the girl. He immediately wondered where she could have gone and began to go upstairs to find her. But the protagonist was already waiting for him and asked why the guard is following her. Of course, the guard is very much frightened and surprised by such a sudden appearance of the girl next to him, and moreover, the fact that she figured him out. Naturally, he immediately tried to justify himself so that the girl would not guess that he was following her. The guy says that he was not following her but was just heading upstairs. But the gullible girl immediately snatches the phone out of his hands. Immediately, she started looking at the guy's phone, and saw that there was a photo of her talking to her mother. The girl immediately asked why the guy had taken the photo without their knowledge. Naturally, this made the protagonist very angry. She said that apparently it seems to her that this guard has not good intentions, and therefore she will go and report it to the police. Of course, the guard immediately got worried and said that it would be good to solve everything without the police. Under pressure, he decided to tell the girl why he decided to do it. He said he was just asked to do it. But the girl's questions did not end there, and she asked who asked him to do it. Then the guard said he didn't know the guy's name. According to him, he just gave him some money and said he didn't need to do anything, just to look after the girl in the hospital and take a couple of pictures. Then the girl asked how to contact the man and if he had a number. Then the guard said that that person is in the last call in his contacts. The girl naturally decided to call there, because she wondered why someone would take a picture of her and her mom. She thinks it's the same bastards that were yesterday and tried to abuse her. At that time, the phone rang at the same guy who came with Lou to the girl. He looked who was calling him, while smoking a cigarette. Obviously, he knew that the information was calling him. Then as soon as he picked up the phone, the guy immediately asked how the guard was doing. He wondered if there was any new information about the girl. Naturally, hearing these words, the protagonist was very surprised. She immediately started to ask the guy who he was and why he was following her. At this point, she was a little worried because she was talking to a man she didn't know, who had ordered the guard of the hospital where she was lying to follow her. Hearing the girl's voice, the guy seemed a little surprised, but he was not embarrassed in the slightest and just continued smoking his cigarette. Well, immediately he said that he did not expect a girl to call him, and of course he is a little surprised, but he specifies whether it is really her, also calling her a beauty as it was the last time they met. Hearing such an eloquent interlocutor at the phone, the girl is even more surprised and misunderstanding and asked who she is talking to. Then, without too much indignation, the guy asked the girl how it could be and whether she had already forgotten him. Obviously, in his words, there was a touch of irony. Also, a little mockingly, he told the girl that he would cry if she really forgot him a little. At the same time, he emphasizes that he saw her this morning. At that moment in the girl's mind, she gets a picture of the guy she is talking to and her savior. She realizes that the one she is talking to is one of these guys. It turns out that at this moment her interlocutor is in the office of his friend who just saved the main heroine. Hearing that the girl does not say anything to him in response, the guy realizes that she probably remembered him and asked her about it personally. She immediately said that she remembered the guy and called him Puxin's subordinate. Hearing these words, the guy was so much surprised that he even choked on the drink he was drinking. But the girl does not get rid of turnovers, asks if it is true that following her is the work of her savior. She becomes curious about what he wants from her. While in the office, Lou notices that his subordinate choked, and because of this, he and his other subordinate paid attention to him. Looking directly at his friend, Mr. Lou even hesitated a little, obviously wondering what had caused his friend to choke up. Hearing her words, the white-haired guy asked the girl if she even knew who she was calling with such a rude word as Puxin. He emphasized that girls better not do that anymore. At that time, he heard their conversation and got up from his seat to understand who his friend was talking to. After he approached the guy, Will immediately asked him if he was in touch with the girl Lou took to the hospital. Seeing his friend, the white-haired guy immediately changes his face. He becomes more sullen than he was before. He smiles and says that he is talking to the girl. The guy once again calls her a beauty and emphasizes that she is the girl the gentleman picked up, emphasizing that the girl has been quite vigilant, so much so that she has already managed to catch the very guard who was ordered to watch her. At this moment, Mr. Lou looks a little sullen, but his friend is still smilingly telling his boss that he can't even imagine who is this young lady. At this time, he was grinning with a smirk at Lou. Immediately after these words, he throws the protagonist's personnel file on the table and informs the gentleman that she is his nephew's sister-in-law. Naturally, the fellow talks about Chi. Hearing this, the protagonist, who is with the earphone, suddenly changes in her face. At first, she doesn't guess what is being talked about between these two men she doesn't know, as suddenly she finally realizes what has happened. Mu Shiwei realizes that the man she calls Puxin is her ex-husband's uncle, and she finally realizes that his name is related to Lu Qi. She is naturally very embarrassed by what she has learned, but wonders how such an incredible coincidence could have happened. The Lu Qi, in turn, having heard that this girl is his nephew's sister-in-law, decides to open her personal file. After reading something in it, with a very sullen look, the guy closes the folder, then immediately afterwards, looking at his friend, he says to give him the phone so that he can communicate with this girl. Naturally, this reaction surprised his friend a little, but still he obeys. After picking up the phone, the gentleman finally decided to introduce himself to the protagonist. He says his name is Lu Tingyuan. He calmly tells the girl that he is the uncle of her fiancé, Lu Qi. After he said this, the young man also says that because of their relationship, he is also her elder. Hearing this, the girl asks him why he sent a guard to follow her. At this time, the girl is a little indignant, and the guard seems to be in fear. Hearing the girl's question, Mr. Lu says that there has been a slight misunderstanding. He explains to the protagonist that he originally thought that she is another fake girl, while his friend, listening to this conversation, smiles. Naturally, after hearing that the gentleman who saved her realized his mistake, the protagonist continues to tease him a little and asks if she understands correctly that now he no longer has doubts about the reality of the situation. At which point she thinks that perhaps the gentleman thought that this is commercial espionage, and naturally because of this he thought that she was a fake girl. Naturally, the gentleman answers the girl's question about doubts and for this situation, and he tells her that of course he has no more doubts, because according to his words to the bride of the baby, Qi, such nonsense is not necessary. Having heard these words, the protagonist thinks a little and exhales as if she is going to do some brave deed. Unexpectedly, she tells the guy that she thanks him for saving her yesterday. Also, Na emphasizes that if she has the opportunity, she will also help him sometime in the future, while she emphasizes that she breaks off her engagement with her fiancé. At this point, the girl looks as if she is really worried about the words she has said, but her excitement seems to disappear somewhere, and with a touch of irony, she says that because of this, Mr. Lu Tingyuan is not destined to be her senior. But before ending the conversation, the girl sarcastically calls him uncle. At the same time, right after these words, the girl throws the guy's phone back to him. At this point, she looks a little angry, but at the same time, she thinks that all that happened is a very big bad luck, because in addition to all this, Pupsin also turned out to be the uncle of her ex-fiancé. Immediately after these thoughts, the protagonist recalls the very moments that occurred when they first met on the highway that night, and she does not understand how this is possible, because this young man did not look older than she was. Of course, it worries her a little bit. At the same time, the girl also thinks about the fact that she does not care about all this, because once she breaks off the engagement with Lu Qi, she will never meet this young uncle again, because she will no longer have any ties with his nephew. At this point in the office, the guys are chatting amongst themselves. Mr. Lu's friend comes up to him and notices that the girl has dropped her phone. He doesn't ask his boss what she was talking about, and the guy also asks if she really wants to break off her engagement to his nephew. At the same time, the gentleman himself says that he heard that his nephew's girlfriend was madly in love with him. He doesn't understand why she would break off her engagement with him in such a case. Then his friend says that he also heard that she is in a relationship with Lu Qi. But this guy also noticed that the gentleman's nephew doesn't like her at all. He also noticed that there are rumors that the nephew is in love with the adopted daughter of the Mu family, so he spends all his time on her. At the same time, the guy also notes that the sister of the main character is a girl who looks like an innocent flower. He notes that now it became clear to him why so pretty girl from the hospital so nervous. Hearing these words, Mr. Lu looked directly at his friend and asked him if he liked women like Mu Shiwei, noting that this girl was a queen. Then his friend decided to soften the edges a little and said that such girls are obviously not to his taste. After all, he is more fond of lords. Hearing his words, the lord even a little thought about it. Then the young uncle again opens the folder with this girl's file. He starts to look meaningfully into this folder and suddenly remembers what happened to them once. It turns out he remembered the moment when he was in the center of the fire and the protagonist pulled his nephew out of the fire. Then he remembered that she asked not to save herself, but to save the Lu Chi. Even though the girl at that moment looked quite exhausted, which is absolutely normal in a fire, and even at the moment when she was carrying his nephew, right after she carried the nephew to his uncle, the girl collapsed without strength. These memories made him think about the girl. At this point, the protagonist had already gone looking for her sister in various rooms in the hospital, and it turns out that at this point her half-sister was convincing a hospital employee that the protagonist was a bit promiscuous. According to Lin, the protagonist often goes to bars with dishonest men, so she emphasizes that the fact that the protagonist used drugs is absolutely normal. At this point, the protagonist was already in front of the door to the room where her sister was and heard the whole conversation. Then Ling tells the nurse that it's not about that, and she's no longer interested in the fact that she was brought here by a man with the last name Lu, at which point the protagonist loudly opens the door to the room, which naturally scares her sister a little. When Lin turned around to see who had entered the room, she saw her sister smiling and asked her what they were gossiping about. The protagonist also emphasized that as far as she could see the girls were having fun together, she also asked if they would mind if she joined them. Other friends, and if you want to see the next part of this story, then be sure to subscribe to the channel. And do not forget to click on the like button under this video. When under it will accumulate 40,000 views or 5,000 likes, I will definitely do for you the second part. Of course, if there will be a sufficient number of chapters, and that's it. See you soon.